Hi everyone, this is Tina Schmidt, and I thank you for joining me in Watercolor Painting with Tina Schmidt. So today I want to do some waterfall with some rocks. I love doing water. Seems like every time I do it I learn something new, and I love doing waterfalls. So I'm going to start with a few simple brushes, you'll see it in the list below, but one of the more interesting brushes is this Zoltan Sabo boar's hair. It's hog's hair, actually, yeah. And it is a flat brush with a slanted bristle. And I'm using the 3/4 inch wide one. And what this forces me to do is to just use big broad shapes and not get into actually drawing with the brush, but more like sculpting. So that's the objective here. Now the green you're seeing I've made with Pthalo Blue and lemon yellow. Sometimes when I do my greens, I like using either Hansa yellow or lemon yellow. I don't use cadmium yellow. I use these other two brighter yellows, and it works just fine when I make up my own greens, which I usually do, whether I'm doing foliage or whatever. I prefer mixing my own green. So I'm using here now a little bit of Pthalo Blue, a little bit of the yellow, the lemon yellow to make the greens, and then for the blue in the background there you see flushing into the water, it's Phthalo Blue and a little bit of Cobalt Blue. So I've got the two kind of blues out there, and you can see the brush I'm using there. It's a Chinese calligraphy brush. It's a natural hair, but it's easy to split that brush, and so it makes a lot of uneven textures, and I like that. The round brush is too refined for this particular piece. So I'm blocking in the color and where I want my rocks. And the idea then is to let the water be as white, and everything else starts to come in as you paint it. And then the white, we eventually sculpt away at it with the blues and the other colors. Right now I'm establishing the different planes in the rocks. So I don't want a rock in the dead center in this case. So I am actually building out from the background forward. So you'll see the waterfall as it starts to develop. There's waterfall plateaus. It'll pour down and then come down on a level and then pour down again. So in something like this, it's kind of important you want to make it interesting. So I want to have these different water effects, and you can see some of the lines are vertical, meaning the water's running downward, and other times you will see I'm doing horizontal strokes, and that means the water has reached a plateau and then is going to go down into the next cascade. So it's a loosely formed step effect. And you can take a little bit of cellophane wrap, dip it in white and blue, or I should say a little bit of pale blue, just to add some splattering effect. There's different ways of doing splatter, which I'll introduce here. Just sort of laying out where I want some of that water to have that water spray. So I go in very lightly with a very thin glaze as I work the water, and you can see where it comes down and then comes forward and then comes down again. I don't want to make the vertical lines right exactly at the plane change coming forward, because I have to allow for the water spray, the water splash. So now I'm lifting some of that color with a flat brush just to soften it. I thought it was too abrupt and I wanted it to have more of a misty look to it. So there's nothing wrong with that. You could also pick it out with a wet paper towel, a very slight damp wrapped around your finger, and you could stroke it upward and remove some of the lines if they get a little too heavy. But in that case, I just use the brush. And you want to have enough rocks to make it interesting, but not so much that it gets too busy and overwhelming for the eye. So it's a fine balance that you have to find. So if I found my rocks a little skimpy, you'll see I'm coming back in here with my flat hog hair brush, the slanted brush, and I'm just working in some of those stones again. And I like putting in some of that green, like the algae is under the surface there or on some of the rocks. And I apologize here for the bottom half of this cutting off the screen there. Sometimes my camera, the arm that's holding the camera up, starts to slowly sink down and it starts up a little higher and then it kind of goes down and I lose track of that sometimes. I apologize. So now I'm coming in with establishing a little bit more water with that very diluted cobalt blue mix. I don't mind if the blue has a little bit of the green in it. I find sometimes Antwerp Blue makes a really nice watercolor. I mean, the color of water. Antwerp Blue with yellow makes a nice sort of lake or pond color, greenish blue. So there's a variety of colors. I wouldn't use ultramarine in this case because it's too much on the red side and it's too dark. I wanted this to be very lively with lots of greens in it. Now I'm coming into the nooks and crannies here, following the direction of the water flow. One tip would be paint the water or use the brush in the direction of the water flow. So if you're using a flat brush, you want to angle that flat brush to the direction of the water flow. Okay, so if it's horizontal, you can see I have horizontal strokes there. If it's vertical, I have vertical strokes. And that's one way to really make the water look convincing. You don't want it to be too descriptive. It gets too heavy. You need little areas of white peeking through. What that does is give it a more lively appearance. It won't feel so heavy. You don't want it to feel like a dead white blanket. You want it to feel more energetic. So you can see here I'm starting to fill in some of the rock area and make splash by painting rock between some of the white. And it's okay to have very uneven lines there, or uneven openings. I'm deepening a little bit of the rock there with tiny strokes, calligraphy strokes, so to speak, to just give it a little accent. One thing that's kind of important is you want to be sure that your rocks are not competing with the water. So the water is the star in this case. The water is the star and the rocks are the supporting elements. Okay, now I'm using the toothbrushes, and I mix it with white, titanium white, and I'm using it to speckle and splatter a little bit. You can use your thumb to flick it, or you can just dab it right onto the painting, the bristles. I use my other hand to kind of cup away and protect areas I don't want oversplashed. So I go generous with the white, dipping it into the white watercolor, titanium white, and then I come over and just dabble with it, and I don't try to control it too much in terms of how it looks. I want it to look splashy and spontaneous, and in a sense, yes, I'm controlling it that way, but I let it be what it wants to be. Okay, now I've got a very fine tip twig brush, and I'm coming in with a slightly darker color than the rock, and I'm making lines in the stones, cracks and little crags. I'm not overdoing it, just being real careful that it's just delineating just a little more character. And here you see I dip some more white into the white, and I am just barely touching it. Oh, in this case, no. In this case right here, I'm using a little bit of the rock color and I'm scumbling it into the rock. I'm using the darker tones, burnt umber, maybe a little bit of Payne's gray mixed with that burnt umber and burnt sienna and the green. It just gives a little more character to the rocks. And now I've gone over and I'm doing the same with the light blue for the water splash as well as titanium white. And it's a good idea to let these different splatters dry in between so they don't run into each other and make mud should they overlap. Now I'm going to work with the upper background there and sort of push that back in space. I'm using that calligraphy brush there, Chinese calligraphy brush. By the way, these brushes I have, I mean, they range from being like this one, about $1.50, to some of them being way expensive, although I really don't put a lot of money in expensive brushes, but occasionally I will spend money on a nice brush that has some very unique characteristics that I really enjoy, that you can't get with any other brush. So yeah. Anyway, I kind of like the way it's coming along. I'm going to develop some of that surface a little more, some of the shallow areas where more green might come through in the waterfall. The green really is somewhat of the algae below, shining through it, kind of transparent, or it could be from the forest scene. But adding greens and yellows to break up the monotony of just blue. You can sometimes add brown in there, which helps to show that the surface of a rock is coming through, or some of the green like you see me doing there. It just gives the waterfall more character and more realism. Now I'm darkening in the edge of that waterfall because I don't want the eye moving off to the highlighted side and have it roll off the page. I want the eye to move down the central area of the waterfall. So by dimming down the peripheral edge a little bit and taking the highlight off of it, the eye automatically will not want to stay there. It will go towards the more sharper edges and the more sharper contrast. Now I'm just coming in here, adding a little more white to the splatter effect with the brush, and also dabbing the toothbrush onto the paper to make thicker, heavier splashes. Now, when it starts to get to this point where it appears to be almost finished, you want to be careful that you don't get in there and dabble too much. Enough is good. I happen to like a lot of light and air in my waterfalls, especially something like this where it's a close-up. If it's really far away, it doesn't need to be this detailed, but since we're so close and we're right up on that water, I wanted to make it, I wanted those splashes to be visible. Let it dry. Now I'm using this. I want to show you this calcium carbonate. Calcium carbonate, it's a powder, and I take a little bit on the side there, and if I just dip my brush in it and back into the titanium white and mix it up, calcium carbonate, sorry for the rubber band, calcium carbonate will make it thicker, almost like a gouache. There is calcium carbonate in the white paint anyway. But now by adding a little bit more of that powder and mixing it up, it makes the paint opaque, the white paint, titanium white. You can see there my splashes. It's looking pretty good. Pretty much got the surface I want. Notice I didn't over describe every surface. So I let it dry, and now I'm stripping it down. Make sure when you take your tape off, you're pulling at a right angle away from the paper. There it is. Pretty much done. I don't think I'll need to go back over this. Sometimes I'll let a painting rest for a day. I'll come back and look at it and say, does it need anything? If nothing is calling for me to do something else with it, I'll sign it and it'll be done. But sometimes even after I sign it, the next day I might have something in mind, but this time I didn't. You can work over a painting anyway, if you have to. Well, thank you for joining me. Please like and subscribe, give me your ideas, and I hope you come back and join me again soon. Take care. God bless you. Be safe.